What does it really take to build one of the greatest entertainment empires in human history? Most people know the name Walt Disney. They know the castles, the cartoons, the theme parks, and the magic. But very few know the painful story behind the success. Before the fame, before Mickey Mouse, before Disneyland, there was a young man struggling with rejection, exhaustion, bankruptcy, and heartbreak. This is not just the story of a businessman or animator. It is the story of resilience. A story about a dream so powerful that failure could not destroy it. From a man who once traveled to Hollywood with only $40 and a suitcase to the creator of a global empire that changed storytelling forever. This is the untold story of Walt Disney. Walt Disney's story began far from the bright lights of Hollywood. He spent much of his childhood in Marceline, Missouri, growing up in a strict and emotionally cold household. His father, Elias Disney, was known for being harsh and demanding, and Walt rarely experienced affection at home. As a child, Walt woke up before sunrise every single day to deliver newspapers through the freezing winters of Kansas City. At just 13 years old, he worked exhausting hours while most children were still asleep. But during those difficult years, Walt found one escape: drawing. At only 7 years old, he began selling sketches to neighbors. Art became his refuge, a way to imagine a better world beyond the hardships. But then, at 16, eager to prove himself, Walt forged his age so he could join the Red Cross during World War I. Instead of fighting on the front lines, he drove ambulances in Europe, often covering them with cartoons and illustrations. Even in war, Walt Disney never stopped drawing. In the early 1920s, Walt Disney believed he was finally on the path to success. At just 19 years old, he convinced investors to support his dream and launched a small animation company called Laugh-O-Gram Studios in Kansas City. Walt dreamed of reinventing animated storytelling through modern fairy tales and creative short films. But there was one major problem. The studio made art people admired, but not enough money to survive. Financial problems quickly spiraled out of control. Investors pulled out. Bills piled up. Employees went unpaid. And by 1923, Laugh-O-Gram Studios collapsed into bankruptcy. According to legend, Walt was left with only $40, an imitation leather suitcase, and on some of his worst days, he survived on dog food because he could not afford proper meals. Most people would have quit right there. But Walt Disney refused to give up. With almost nothing left, he boarded a train to Hollywood, ex-guy carrying little more than his imagination and determination. Just when Walt Disney thought his career was finally recovering, disaster struck again. In 1928, Walt had created a successful cartoon character named Oswald the Lucky Rabbit. The character was becoming popular, and Disney believed he was building a stable future. But during a tense meeting in New York, distributor Charles Mintz revealed devastating news. Disney did not actually own the rights to Oswald. Even worse, Mintz had secretly hired away many of Disney's own animators behind his back. In a single moment, Walt lost his character, his creative team, and his contract. It was one of the greatest betrayals of his life. On the train ride back to California, Walt sat quietly sketching ideas for a new character, a small mouse with round ears and a cheerful personality. At first, Walt wanted to call him Mortimer Mouse, but Walt's wife, Lillian, thought the name sounded too serious. She suggested a different name instead, Mickey Mouse. And from one crushing betrayal, entertainment history was changed forever. Creating Mickey Mouse was only the beginning. Walt Disney now faced another challenge. How could he make audiences care about a cartoon mouse in a world already filled with animated characters? His answer was revolutionary. At the time, synchronized sound in animation was considered risky and unnecessary. Most studios ignored the technology completely. But Walt believed sound could transform cartoons into something audiences had never experienced before. He poured nearly all his remaining money into a bold experiment called Steamboat Willie. It was a massive gamble. In fact, 2 earlier Mickey Mouse cartoons had already failed to find distributors. If this project failed too, Disney's studio might not survive. Then, on November 18, 1928, Steamboat Willie premiered. Audiences were stunned. For the first time, they saw a cartoon character moving perfectly in sync with music and sound effects. Mickey didn't just appear alive, he felt alive. The film became an overnight sensation, launching Mickey Mouse into global fame. And for nearly 20 years, Walt Disney personally provided Mickey's voice himself. By the early 1930s, Walt Disney had become one of the most ambitious creators in Hollywood, but behind the scenes, the pressure was destroying him. Walt worked obsessively. He pushed himself day and night, constantly chasing bigger ideas, higher standards, and impossible perfection. Eventually, his body began to collapse under the stress. He suffered severe anxiety attacks. His hands trembled uncontrollably. Doctors warned him that he needed to stop working completely. For a man driven entirely by creativity and ambition, it was devastating. So Walt stepped away. Together with his wife Lillian, he traveled across the American Southwest and later took an extended cruise vacation to recover. And during that break, something extraordinary happened. An impossible idea entered Walt Disney's mind. What if animation could become more than short cartoons? What if someone created the world's first full-length animated feature film at a time when most people believed audiences would never sit through a feature-length cartoon? Walt Disney began dreaming of Snow White and the Seven Dwarfs. When Walt Disney announced his plan to create Snow White and the Seven Dwarfs, Hollywood thought he had lost his mind. Critics mocked the project relentlessly. They called it Disney's Folly. No one believed audiences would sit through a 90-minute animated movie. Many predicted the film would bankrupt the studio entirely. At first, the budget was expected to cost around $250,000. But as production continued, the costs exploded to nearly $1.5 million, an enormous amount during the Great Depression. Walt became so desperate to finish the film that he mortgaged his own house to keep production alive. Animators worked under incredible pressure. Walt demanded emotional realism, groundbreaking detail, and cinematic storytelling never before seen in animation. Then finally, on December 21st, 1937, Snow White premiered in Hollywood. When the movie ended, the audience rose to their feet in a standing ovation. The film became a global phenomenon. It earned millions of dollars worldwide, saved Disney Studios from financial collapse, and transformed animation forever. The impossible dream had become reality. Despite its incredible achievements, Walt Disney's legacy was far from perfect. Behind the magic existed controversy, conflict, and criticism that still sparks debate today. In 1941, Disney Studios faced a bitter labor strike. Animators protested low pay, unequal treatment, and harsh working conditions. Walt took the strike personally. Furious and deeply hurt, he accused some workers of being communist agitators. The conflict permanently damaged relationships within the studio and changed Disney's internal culture forever. Then, years later, declassified government records revealed another controversial chapter. Walt Disney had served as an FBI informant, sharing information with Edgar Hoover about individuals in Hollywood he suspected of communist connections. His testimony during the anti-communist investigations of the late 1940s remains one of the most debated parts of his life. And then came Disneyland's disastrous opening day, July 17th, 1955. Forged tickets flooded the park, doubling the expected attendance to nearly 28,000 guests. The California heat reached 100 degrees. Asphalt melted beneath visitors' feet. Rides broke down. Water fountains stopped working. The media called it a catastrophe. The day became known as Zero Black Sunday. But once again, Walt Disney recovered. Within a year, Disneyland erased its debts and became one of the most iconic destinations on Earth. In the final years of his life, Walt Disney was no longer dreaming only about movies or theme parks. He was dreaming about the future of humanity itself. His boldest vision was something called Epcot, the experimental prototype community of tomorrow. But this was not meant to be another amusement park. Walt imagined a real futuristic city where 20,000 people would live, work, and experience cutting-edge technology every day. The city would feature climate-controlled environments, advanced transportation systems, and a monorail running through its center. Walt personally recorded detailed presentations explaining his vision. Even while his health declined, he continued obsessively planning the project. But time was running out. On December 15th, 1966, Walt Disney died from lung cancer at the age of 65. And with his death, the original Epcot vision died with him. The blueprints survived, but the dreamer who imagined them was gone. Walt Disney's life was filled with contradictions. He was visionary, yet controversial, inspiring, yet demanding, creative, yet relentless, but above all, he was unstoppable. From delivering newspapers in freezing winters to surviving bankruptcy, betrayal, anxiety, criticism, and failure, Walt Disney transformed imagination into one of the most influential entertainment empires in history. Today, his legacy spans films, television, music, storytelling, and theme parks, visited by hundreds of millions of people across the world. He also became the most awarded individual in Academy Awards history, winning 22 Oscars. Yet perhaps Walt Disney's greatest achievement was not Mickey Mouse or Disneyland. It was proving that persistence can outlast failure, that dreams can survive rejection, and that imagination, when combined with courage, can change the world forever. As Walt Disney once said, all our dreams can come true if we have the courage to pursue them.